Okay, welcome to episode 104 of an Evolving Man podcast. Today I'm excited to be speaking to John Brittan. John is an English actor whose actor name is Jonathan Hansler. He has worked in theatre, film, television, and is a comedian and director. He was John Cleese's Basil Fawlty in the Edinburgh Festival in 2019. Welcome, John.
Hello, Piers.
So, thank you so much for agreeing to come and speak on the podcast. How I'd love to begin segue into the podcast is to ask you a bit about your journey. What got you into acting? What got you into the work you're now doing?
I think escape, Piers, if I'm honest, because you see, I was sent to boarding school when I was very, very young. No, well, not some people go even younger, but I was 9 years old. But I had to also catch up because I came late by a year because my father didn't necessarily. We weren't filthy rich or any of that. My father got a tax-free job in the Middle East, and he saw that was the way. He had me down to go to these places since I was born. I was literally, might as well just literally inscribed in blood that I should attend these. I was down for Sherborne Senior School. I had to make all these grades. It was almost like I was pre-matched to do all this stuff before I was, was even conceived. I mean, that's kind of a tough thing to come out of the womb going, oh God, But yeah, he was quite a hard taskmaster, my father, and I didn't quite fit into his military ideas. So as being an actor, yes, it was an escape. I think it was a terrible thing to do, really, because, as I say later on, only 3 years ago I was diagnosed with cptsd. So I chose literally the most difficult profession for somebody with that ailment, without knowing. But because, I mean, it saved my skin, I think, in a number of ways. But certainly people took advantage of me when I had trauma, but I didn't know I had trauma. That's the thing today. And even if you talk to the NHS in these days, they don't even. I spoke to a nurse recently, and she said it's so new, CPTSD. It's so new, nobody really knows about it, and so it's kind of, it's almost it's still an unknown. And I think in America it's better known, but here it's a kind of an unknown entity. So yeah, I've been sort of had it since I was 9 years old, and not even known until 3 years ago. So you imagine being in industry is probably one of the hardest of all, and trying to cope with something you've no idea you've got. You go to a doctor or a therapist and they say, oh, you've got CAT or CBT, one of these things. And you sit there and someone's writing notes and you're going, oh, this doesn't fit in. What's going on? And then you think when you're sat there, they're filling all these forms in, all this stuff. And you're sat there going, you're doing all this writing, and you're sat there going, he hasn't talked about this. Surely it's not anxiety. I don't feel I've got depression. Well, I don't know what this is. You know what I mean? And then you go, and of course you end up getting drunk and trying to hide everything. I did drugs, I did booze, I did cigarettes, I did everything, anything to not be me, anything to not be John. Nothing. I didn't want anyone to be John. And that was a Jonathan Hansler, I think, was an escape as well, because in a way it was another name. I could pretend I was somebody else rather than the rather abused John. So that was my way through, I suppose. Yeah. And I think in a way acting has helped, and comedy has helped in a lot of ways, because it's very therapeutic in a way, especially playing villains. I played a lot of bad guys because for some reason when you have trauma, it's very easy to go to those darker places that many people can't reach. They're much easier to get to, because you can go to absolute extremes. One of the strange things about trauma is always pushing you forward, which is not a negative thing. I think it's a very positive thing. Anyway, I'm rabbiting on, so you must ask your next question.
No, I mean, I'm quite happy for you to go into more depth. I mean,
Yeah.
this is a long form interview, so please, if it's 5, 10 minutes,
I would also say, my friend, that people do take advantage of you in this industry. I've been taken advantage of. I was abused after my school as well, because I think the trouble is, once you're abused already, you're like a rabbit in the headlights. anyone can see that, and they say, oh, Mr. Vulnerability over there. I lived in the Middle East, you know, in Qatar, and over there it's just huge hypocrisy. The Arabs have all got bars, yet they chop their hands off for having an alcohol, you know. I was almost sexually abused by a sheikh, and another guy in a car already abused me there, and I, you know, so it was like, you know, I was manna for the masses, really. And it was only until I grew up, or I gave up booze, and I started to realize and take responsibility for myself and my life, which I still aren't there yet, but I'm getting there, you know, that I realized, you know, I have this incredible inner strength within me, which I see more and more is coming to the fore. You know, I just did a 5K today in 22:40, which is pretty good for an old boy, you know.
22:40. Wow, that's amazing. That's probably, I've just been for a run as well, but I don't think I got anywhere near that. So that's incredible.
So I'm keeping myself together, you know, and I think I'm a lot better than I was. But you know, the problem I think you have with something like this is that you have a very dark voice inside you that is, it's almost like it's the ghost of my father, and it's the ghost of so many bullies in my life, and even performers and actors and people like that who've really, really given me a hard time. And that sort of merged, all that's kind of merged into one sort of voice, you know what I mean? That's always telling me this, that, or the other. But I'm starting not to listen to it now. And through Buddhism and through chanting and through doing a lot of healthy, I've got a nutritionist who's helped me, and a life coach and all this kind of stuff, you know, very much, and you know, looking inward rather than outward, like we were talking about. I think that's really, really helped me, you know. And I think one of the worst things you can do with CPTSD and things like that is drink, which I would never have known about. You know, alcohol, how would you know that CPTSD? I mean, you know, obviously it's not good to do, but to be an alcoholic and have CPTSD, I'm sure must be crazy. And but the other thing is obviously eat sugar and stuff like that, and eating processed meals, because it will just send your mind up the wall. I mean, a normal person, it sends them a bit crazy, but if you can imagine you've got that on top, that's going to drive you nuts.
Mm,
So
mm.
now I'm on a very low sugar, no sugar, you know, healthy sort of loads of. I mean, the only thing is in the morning it's fruits and things, because you have to have sugar in your body. Have to have something to get you through the day, but no processed sugar, you know, none of that. So I've stopped practically everything. I do like a coffee, and that's probably going against the rules slightly, but there you go.
Wow, that's great. That's something I've been fascinated in for years, you know. Christopher Palmer, who's a psychiatrist who wrote a book about metabolism and how that links into mental health. And he says just by doing a simple thing of exercising, sleeping better, changing your diet, you can reverse mental
You
health.
can reverse metal, and I feel that's happening. It's a very strange feeling, but I was just running through the woods today, and I was looking up at the sky and the trees, and I just thought, how blessed this is, how wonderful. I've got this wonderful park called Gladstone Park. We're named after Gladstone, the famous Prime Minister.
Mm,
And it's one of the most beautiful unknown parks in London, and it has the best 5K run you could ever wish for. It's got trees, like loads of trees that sort of, you know, like arcades of trees. What do you call them when they all, like in a forest where they all blend together? I can't remember. They arc together. It's just really glorious, you know, and it's a really beautiful park. Very lucky to have it. And it's not one of those parks that closes at any time. You can actually walk in at any time of day or
mm.
night, because it's all open.
Wow, amazing. I've never been. I used to live right next to Hampstead Heath, so I was saying I was in London.
That's very beautiful as well. That's a very beautiful park.
It is. It's so big as well. I
It
mean,
is enormous. It is enormous. Yeah, yeah.
it's got the swimming. I
Regent's
mean,
Park. Regent's Park's another of my favorite parks. It's a very beautiful park.
I've
Yeah.
spent quite a bit of time in that last couple of years coming up for the documentary and just sitting by the trees, and there's some really sacred places.
There are.
Yeah.
Oh man, nature is so beautiful. It really is. It's just staggering.
Yeah, yeah. And there's so many things I can really resonate with when you're talking about complex PTSD and you know, Pete Walker in his book Complex PTSD talks about
Yes.
a critic. And I mean, mine, when I began the journey, I had my breakdown in my 20s. I was working in the financial sector in London when I was
Oh my
working,
God, that
living.
must have been tough, Piers. That Pete, that must have been tough. That
Oh,
really, because you all those assholes. Sorry, but yeah, you know what I mean. Come on.
yeah, no, Totally. I mean, I was a salesman, so I had to do 50 cold calling sales, trying to sell financial courses, which were high ticket, so between £2,000 to £5,000 each. And
Wow.
I'm an introvert. I mean, which is strange doing the podcast, but
Well, I'm an introvert as well, and I'm a comedian, but that's the truth. You know, we're all once we're out there, we're all ba-bum, ba-da, look at me, I'm the funny guy. And then suddenly on the inside, you know, there's this very quiet sort of. I like one of the things I really started to enjoy is my own solitude, which I never thought. I thought it was a miserable old git, you know. And I suddenly start these days. I start to think, well, actually, I quite like this. Isn't it crazy? I really rather like my solitude because I can read. I read Eckhart Tolle. I love Eckhart Tolle.
Oh,
I read The Power of Now, not Power of Now, the oh, what's it called?
Ethics
Oh,
for
by
the
the
New
way,
Millennium. Is that it?
A New Earth.
New Earth, that's it.
It's an amazing story. It talks about the pain body, which is what we have inside us, which is this
Mhm.
painful thing that attacks us. And it's sort of it's there. It's the reason why couples have arguments. It's the reason why, and it's sort of this thing. It's like it's part of the ego, but it's sort of connected to the ego. But it's called the pain body, and that's why babies, when they cry at birth, some of them cry really, really loudly. They've
Mhm.
got very hard, heavy pain bodies. I imagine I probably was like that when I was born, but but some have very light pain bodies. The interesting thing is the ones with the heavier pain bodies that go into the more spiritual side of life because they want to get free. They want to break through from the chains, as it were, which
Mhm.
is what Scrooge is all about. I love that story. I love Christmas Carol. I mean, I've born on the same day as Charles Dickens, so
Really?
yeah.
One of
and
my
and Eddie Izzard. So there
it's
you go. What can you have?
well, interesting. Eddie Izzard, he went to boarding school age 6,
Oh my
and
God! Look at him.
yeah,
I
he went
mean,
age 6, and then just after his mother had died, he was sent to boarding school. And then Scrooge, I didn't realize this, but the reason Scrooge was like he was because he was sent off to boarding school
yes.
in the story, and I'd never realized that. I'm like, wow. One of my guests told me that story.
Yes,
The
yes.
orphan
That wouldn't
child.
surprise me. That wouldn't surprise me because when you look at Dickens' writing, and Dickens was obviously, I don't know if Dickens was sent to boarding school. He was too poor, I think.
I
He
don't
was
think
too, he was a bootblacking, wasn't he? That's where Oliver came from. The idea he was his parents were very poor, and he was sent to a bootblacking as a or something, and his father was in debtor's prison.
yeah, 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 yeah,
So that
yeah.
was very, very interesting, but
Mm,
yeah, how interesting is that? And that is why I love that story, I think, so much, because
mm,
it is a story of redemption, which is kind of a little bit like my film in some ways, because
mm,
Peter Cook is kind of the ghost of Christmas present. My father is the ghost of Christmas past.
mm,
I don't know what the ghost of Christmas future is, perhaps, or death, or whatever it is. But that is death. It's facing death and
mm,
realizing it's that we live forever anyway. So what are we
mm.
worrying about when we bear
What's
in
the
mind?
film, Jonathan? What's the
I don't want to give a title away because it's clever. So I'm not going to
Mm,
say the title. I won't say it because if I do, somebody else is going to take it, and I won't do that. But yes,
mm,
it's the story of my life. It's the story of how do you cope when you're diagnosed with, well, not diagnosed, when you're traumatized from the age of 9, or probably before. I imagine I was probably traumatized when I was in hospital, having my eyes done. That's probably freaked a kid out about the age of 4 or 5. That must have been quite scary at the best of times, I would have thought. But majorly traumatized from probably the age of 9 when I first arrived at this place. Because the thing is, what you don't realize is when kids are abused, they're getting abused. I mean, I remember, this is absolutely true as far as I can remember. In fact, a guy called Martin Herring, who was at my school, who was a little bit more alert, shall we say, than I was. He told me, and I do remember this, of a huge explosion going off. And 2 kids had tried to blow that science lab up with the headmaster in it because he'd been abusing. I didn't know he'd been abusing them, but apparently a lot of the bullying came from people who were. So I wasn't getting abused directly by the headmaster. I was abused by a prefect when I was there. But um, but because some kids were being abused by, maybe I was. You know what it's like. CPTSD is so black and white that I can't remember some of my life. I
mm,
don't know what went on. It's almost like a checkerboard. You can't, the black bits and the white bits, it's like you can see all of them, but you can't sort of put them together. So I don't know, but what I can remember was I was abused by a prefect there. But the headmaster would literally parade down the dormitory late at night, reeking of cigars and whiskey. And if you spoke or you know whatever it was, you were in the shit. I mean, seriously, if you got caught and taken to his study, I know I got beaten with his Moroccan slipper, but I can't remember. And he used to beat you on your bare bum. He used to watch us shower, all this kind of shit. You know, he washed between the buttocks. I always remember that was one of his things. Um, you know, and very, very odd. He used to take kids on skiing trips and you know, and have them bouncing on his knee when he took them on a rugby trip. You know, it was just, it was an unending sort of torment. And I think the thing was, we weren't allowed to leave the school in any case. You know, you weren't allowed to leave, otherwise you were brought back to his study, and God knows what went on there. So you weren't allowed to. If you were found downtown, that was it. You know, you were in trouble. So 3 months at a time, we kind of locked up really. We'd have the half terms, and we'd have the whatever it was, but we weren't, you know, we weren't allowed. So that was it. So 9 years old, I was traumatized there. And I went, and that was a school of sexual abuse and kids sitting on each other's knees during Top of the Pops, and God knows what was going on there. I mean, it was bonkers, you know, and the food was so poor. I remember there were mice in the kitchens. The food was lacking. Whether it's nutritious is doubtful. I mean, it really was a terrible school. And then the second school I went to, are we allowed to say the names of schools?
It's up to you, really. I mean, I've mentioned my school before. I mean, as I said, a lot of my teachers are in prison, so
Yeah, well, I went to a place called Cleese, which is in Dorset after that, and they had some very difficult things. There's a lot of brutality in that school. So, this was at that time. I don't know what it's like now, but this is then. And so it was, you know, it was very brutal. I can remember, for example, um, having things called specials on a Saturday, which meant you were up at 4 o'clock in the morning. You had to go on a 5 mile run or 4 mile run. And I can remember November, and then you'd come back and then you go into the lake and you had to find a particular piece of weed, because this bastard color sergeant would go out there, row out and find a piece of weed, bring it back. And you had to swim in this bloody lake in the middle of November, find this weed, bring it back. And then after that, you had like star jumps and press ups. They called it warming up. And we were in this old disused kind of like squash court, and we did press ups. And this color sergeant put his boot on my head and pushed my head neck straight into the concrete, you know. And then after that, you go in to have showers. But what they did in those days, they take the nozzles off. I mean, this is the trouble when you give power to a 16-year-old. What the hell are you doing in these places? What sort of idiots do this to people?
mm,
You know,
that's right.
that was every week.
Yeah. It's like this, it's abuse. Speaking to Nick or Duffel on Monday, it's like normalized neglect, that people are going, well, is that appropriate? Because we all knew these things were happening.
Yeah, yeah.
And the teachers knew. I mean, I worked as a boarding school. After I left school when I was 18, I went a couple of months later to a boarding school in Australia. And I always thought that the teachers had no idea what was happening with us as pupils. It was like they were totally oblivious. But I could be 50 meters, 30 meters away from a boy who was drinking, and I could tell he was drunk. And then I suddenly realized, oh my God, all of the teachers must have known we were drinking. The
Mm.
rumors about sexual abuse, which the the pupils all knew about. I mean, I thought, well, the teachers must have known as well, because I knew what was happening in this school being a teacher. And
Yeah.
it suddenly made me realize that, oh, I thought they had no idea.
Well, you know, the funny thing is, Piers, what's interesting is we used to say to sneakers weak, isn't that interesting? Or we weren't supposed to sneak. Well, there's a direct reason why we weren't allowed to when you look at it now. Because if you did sneak and you said anything, you know, the whole school was going to collapse or whatever it was, or they'd find out about this, that, or the other. So
Mm.
what you thought was the right thing was do was the wrong thing to do.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think that's it's one of the things George Orwell talks about in one of his books, is that was one of the unwritten rules, that you do not sneak, you do not grass.
Yeah.
That's kind of one of the the key things, because
Yeah,
the way I saw it is, as one teacher for 50, or one housemaster for 50 boys or girls. Once they go out of the room, you're suddenly left with 49 other kids. If you grass them all up, that's the end of
yeah,
life.
yeah.
So we
Yeah,
learn
but I think it was a
preservation.
wider thing than that. I think it was more about the masters and the authority of the school
Yeah.
and what was going on there. That's what you shouldn't talk about.
Yeah, 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 yeah,
And of course,
yeah,
it would cut to the kids as well. Of course, it would. But you know what they were trying to say. I
yeah.
mean, it got so bad. What we used to have on a Sunday was ridiculous. We used to write letters home, and they were censored. And there was no telephone. You couldn't call anybody. There was no telephone. We weren't allowed to use the phone.
Mhm,
It was a letter.
mhm,
And the letter would be censored by the headmaster. And often he used to steal, he apparently used to steal, I don't know this, but apparently he used to steal postal orders and things like that that were sent to the children. It's unbelievable, isn't it? Unbelievable. You couldn't write it.
mhm,
A lot of this is going into my show, of course, my one man show and the film, of course. Yeah.
mhm. Have you seen the show Goodbye Uncle Fudgy yet?
Yeah, I went to see him. I went to see him in Brighton. It's very good. He's very, very good. Um, and he's very funny, and he does a very, very good job. And mine's very different. Mine's very different. But yeah, I actually bring Peter Cook into it. Peter Cook, and this is one of my great heroes, was my savior in life. It
Mm,
was he who kind of he was the reason I think why I went into the entertainment industry, because when I was 16 years old, I saw a sketch with John Cleese and Peter Cook on a park bench, and it was the Amnesty International Secret Policeman's Ball. And this was my wake-up call to comedy. I'd seen, I remember, I think Not Like Clock News was going around. It was a fun, it was there was certainly a bit of a kick up the arse going up and punk was on. I love punk, and I'm a huge fan of Johnny Rotten as well. John Lydon is actually one of my great heroes, because he just, he didn't give a screw, he just literally said what he meant.
mm,
And and he meant it, and and they changed. You cannot argue whether you like punk or you don't. They changed the face of music. They changed the face of this bloody country.
mm,
People were really allowed to express themselves, and we did have the hippie movement before that, but certainly punk was the way that people really managed to speak out and become really human beings. I think,
mm,
you know,
mm.
being real human people.
Yeah, we've been so repressed and dissociated.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And John was the one who knew about Savile as well,
Mm.
He says we weren't supposed to say anything in his,
Yeah,
in his
I've seen
tones,
the interview. I saw that
Yeah,
interview with
yeah,
John Lydon in the 70s where he says,
yeah.
and he got cut from the BBC
He got
after that.
taken. That's the Peter Cook. I mean, Peter Cook was persona non grata at the BBC. And I think the real sad thing about Peter, who I adore to this day, and people say he wasn't a nice man, all this crap. Well, actually, people. This is what I hate, Piers. In my industry, you get called difficult to work with, or this crap. Peter Sellers, who I think had massive trauma because he came out of the war. Spike Milligan, who I think also had massive trauma because they both came out of the war. And Spike alluded to all the work he was doing. No, he was traumatized, but didn't even know they had it. Peter Sellers definitely was traumatized. I'm sure they were. And yet he was called difficult to work with. And Peter Sellers said, I'm not difficult to work with. If I'm working with Stanley Kubrick, I'm not difficult to work with because I respect everything he does. If I'm working with Blake Edwards, I'm not difficult to work with because he's a genius. I loathe mediocrity. That's what Peter said, and I totally agree with that. I think, you, even despite all you have, you've got to push forward to be your very best.
Mhm,
There's only that's what else is there?
mhm, mhm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And what you're saying about the trauma as well, I feel I've talked about this before on the podcast, is like three levels of healing. And um, Judith Herman, who first
I'm
coined the
really
word,
fascinated to know more about this because this is exactly where I'm going at the moment. So this is what you're telling me now is very interesting. So I can shut up maybe for a minute and listen to you.
maybe. Judith Herman, who wrote the book Trauma and Recovery in 1991, psychiatrist, she first coined the phrase complex PTSD.
Did she?
Yeah. Because she said there's lots of people who've got PTSD, but she says, well, what happens when it repeats? And so
Yeah,
that was
yeah,
then, if you look at, say, mind.org and their definition of complex PTSD, it's something which is repeated over and over again, which if you think of
exactly.
boarding school, it's like the classic, it's complex PTSD because we were broken attachments going back to school, not
Yeah,
just once, but if we went back weekly or every 3 months, it was over and over again. So it's that kind of definition. And she talks about 3 levels of the trauma healing. Um, and one of them is kind of can't remember them off the top of my head, the first one, but the second one is like grieving, a space to grieve. And then the
mhm.
third one is like almost bringing our gift back into the world.
Yes,
And I
yes.
spoke to
I can
Simon.
feel that. Yes.
It's like we bring that gold. So the Sufi, I think it was Rumi who said, the wound is where the light enters, where God enters, where the
Well,
divine.
it's Groucho Marx. It says, I think is my favorite, where he says, "Blessed are the crack because they let the light in," which I think is a wonderful,
Beautiful.
wonderful
I haven't
phrase.
heard that one. That's
Yeah,
great.
yeah.
Yeah. So I
Yeah.
just really see that if we can bring our gift, it's like Robert Bly in his book Iron John, he says, wherever your wound is where your gift will be, your greatest gift to
And I
society.
really realize that, more and more these days. That perhaps it's such a shame it all comes to you later on, isn't it? Why couldn't you have this 20, 30 years ago? So much of, it'd be wonderful, wouldn't it? Just go back in time and go, oh, that's it. Right. Okay. But, it is what it is. Life is what it is. But I do believe things do happen for a reason. I'm sure they do. Absolutely, they do. And more and more as I get older, I realize that. And those people say, no, it doesn't. That a lot of rubbish. No, it's not. No, I don't think that at all. I do think everything is, there is a sort of, it's all being tested. The universe is always playing games with you, man. It never stops playing games. And
Yeah.
it really tests the people who are up for testing as well.
Definitely,
Do you know
definitely.
what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, again, Judith Herman in her book, she talks about that most of us who've had trauma, it only comes in the third and the fourth decade of life. Some of my clients, it's not until they're 70 that it comes to
Yeah.
the surface. It's like we're almost when we're in our 20s and 30s. I was fortunate that I had a breakdown in my 20s and I couldn't function. I was homeless. So it was like I either die or I heal.
Yes.
So I was kind
You
of,
were sort of like a bit like Eckhart Tolle, who had a mass. He was about to kill himself, and he said, but there's the him and the self. So there's two of me.
yeah, yeah,
So which one am I talking to now? What's telling me to kill? And then he suddenly realized that it's not that. That his voices, they're just the voices in his head.
yeah,
And then he decided to write those successful books, and the rest is history.
yeah. I think, but I had a similar experience to Eckhart Tolle in the monastery. I was kind of on the point of suicide, and suddenly it was such a dark space. And it was like realizing I couldn't go forward because I was like, well, I have no life. I couldn't go back because I didn't want to look at the trauma because it was too painful. And I couldn't be in the moment because it was like, well, I just want to kill myself. But at
Yeah.
that moment, it was like, just for about 5, 10 minutes, I woke up and it was like, oh my God, this is beautiful.
Yes.
I'll be like
Yeah.
this forever. But it didn't stay.
Yes. But that is the thing. It's like when people reach the other side, they say, apparently when you meet your father or whatever it is on the other side, there's people who have crossed over, if you believe in any of this. Some people won't, that's fine.
Mm.
I like to be open with everything because I think that's the best possibility in life. You know, if you're open for everything, everything can come to you. If you shut yourself off, it's not going to come to you. So what do you want for your life? You know, I tend to open myself to any possibility because I think that's absolutely the way to do it. So people say when they cross over that, you know, the people that they meet afterwards, or the energy, I think I rather believe it's the energy. I don't think they're ghosts or anything. I think it's just energy. And I think the energy sort of shapes itself into the people that you knew. And I think, because in Buddhism, what you believe is, you know, that there's a sense of reincarnation, all that kind of thing. But the body is just a suit we have, you know, we're just borrowing a suit for all our lives, you know. And then at the end, the suit's gone and the energy stays. So whatever that energy was is there perpetually. And I think that's a really interesting way to look at things, because it keeps you very buoyant, believing, you know, this is just a kind of game. We're just having a bit of fun down here on Earth. And then afterwards, I mean, I believe it's been a very tough game for me. And I think when Buddhism, you believe in fact, in my show, you know, It's a Wonderful Life.
Yeah, of course.
It's one of my favorite films. Right at the beginning, you got those two stars talking to each other. You remember?
Yeah,
Right at
of
the beginning.
course.
And they say in my show, I won't give too much away, but right at the beginning of the show, it says, so who have we got? Well, he doesn't want to come back. What? He doesn't want to come back. Well, he wants to do it all in one. Is he nuts? No, I don't know. You know, he wants to do his whole life in one. Right. We'll have to make this difficult. We're going to have to make this difficult. What I think we're going to do is we'll give him an alcoholic father who's a naval officer. We'll give him a mother who's an artist. They ain't going to get on. Then we're going to send him to one of the worst boarding schools in Britain. And it goes on like that. That's how my opening of my show starts.
Amazing. Well, as you say that, so my father was an alcoholic. He was a naval officer. My mother was an artist.
No.
Yeah. So she's
Piers, we are kindred spirits, my friend.
yeah, and
We
then
are
the
kindred
boarding
spirits
school
in
I went to,
adventure.
well, yeah, it was pretty feral. So wow.
Yeah. Feral is a very good word, actually. And the second school, feral as you like, mate. Feral as you like. Brutal. Brutal.
Yeah. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about the journey of healing. That's something I'm fascinated by. You mentioned Buddhism a bit.
Well,
Yes.
Peter Cook was certainly instrumental in my. I think what saved me is the ability to laugh, make others laugh, and you know, use humor in my way. And I think that's really. I mean, I'm single. I still don't have anyone. I was unfortunately 7 years ago. I had a girlfriend who was a bit of a psychopath, narcissistic, and all, but was a brilliant comedian. So, and I don't blame her at all. She had a difficult childhood herself, life, you know, and I think what they say as Eckhart Tolle talks about, he says it's when two pain bodies suit each other, they can often form a relationship. It's not necessarily about being in love with somebody. It's about two pain bodies going, oh, you'll be fun to be with, da 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 da. And of course, those pain bodies are going to have a war with each other, but you've no idea that's going to be the case. So Peter's been probably the biggest. In fact, I am very proud that back in keep me on the straight and narrow on this, Piers, because I'll go off on tangents if I'm not careful. But Peter Cook ran a club called the Establishment Club in Soho in the 60s, which was very, very brilliant because it was called the Establishment because it got at the establishment. It wasn't called the Establishment to be very nice and establishment. It was so he could get at them. So he would literally lampoon and satirize, which is where Private Eye came from, which of course Peter Cook launched. He's a
Really? I
brilliant
didn't know
man.
that.
I'm very proud to say that on those premises, when I say those words, I can hear a Peter Cook sketch coming into my head. On those premises, on those exact premises, there's a sketch he does called The Frog and Peach, which has those words in it. They just came to mind. But on those premises, he launched the Establishment Club in 1961, and on the very first night of that, they had a guest list. They had 800, a maximum of 500 or something. They had a guest 5,000 waiting list or something like that. And there were cars going down Greek Street and even royalty couldn't get in. It was crazy. And on that site, I ran in 2008 a comedy club called the Disestablishment because I didn't want it to be satirical. And we had all sorts of great comics on. And what we did is we got a plaque above the door, and if you walk down Greek Street, look above the door of 18 Greek Street, which is now called the Zebrano, but obviously was the establishment. There's a club, there's a plaque up there, and it says Peter Cook, comedian and only twin, founded the establishment club on this spot in 1961. And it's there forever. Isn't that wonderful? Until that place goes, which I imagine won't be for a long time. So I was very proud about that. So no, I'm sidetracking slightly, but Peter was instrumental to me when I saw the sketch where he said interesting facts with John Cleese, where John Cleese goes, where Cook goes, do you know your intestines are 4 miles long? It's amazing how they cram them all in. And that means none of the food you eat is very rarely fresh. And Cleese goes, well, fancy that. He says, I don't fancy that at all. If you fancy that. And he goes on this weird sort of spiral of madness. And I thought to myself when I was watching, who the hell is this? This was a light bulb moment for me. I'd never seen anyone so brilliant who could just spin stuff out of nowhere. He was anarchic. He was dangerous. He was edgy. He was everything I was interested in. You know, he was a punk comedian. If you ever want a punk comedian, it was Peter. You know, no surprise that he presented shows like Revolver and things like that. You know, you know, punk shows and things like that. You know, and I suddenly got this light. I suddenly realized that's what I want to do. I want to do what he's doing. I love the sort of freedom he had, and I'd always been influenced, rather like him, on nonsense poetry. You know, I've always loved that. Was my saving grace when I was at boarding school, because to get out of the mundanity of being in this sort of boredom threshold. Can you imagine the boredom in those places? The ridiculous and these ridiculous lessons, and this, you know, having to want to kick in the old days, wanting to, a big fan of Arsenal, and it went from black and white to color because in the sort of my sort of, I don't know, earlier years, I was in a comprehensive. I was kicking a football about. I loved Arsenal. The minute I went to that place, I was forced to play rugby. My eyes weren't working. Everything was wrong. It was all shit, you know. And so I decided that this world of nonsense, Victorian nonsense poetry, I was fascinated by. And so I used to learn for no other reason. I was terrible academically, but I used to learn. Well, how else do you cope with trauma? When you got trauma, how are you supposed to write it? How are you supposed to do any maths? How are you supposed to do any art? How are you supposed to do anything? Mm-hmm. If you're traumatized, what do you do? What do you do? And I just used to learn nonsense poetry. Mm. And that was my kind of saving grace. And that Peter was the same. But what's interesting to me, and I'm going to come to, Peter was my light bulb moment. As I say, I found humor through Peter, and I realized I wanted to be a funny guy when I was something funny, something creative. And I was in a double act for 9 years. And in fact, I used to play 20 characters a night. So, you know, it's amazing. It's amazing when you do something like that, you realize that's the key to character acting. You understand how you can be a character actor, because you can literally switch from one to another. And that's not hard for someone with CPTSD, because you've been changing, or you've been hiding from everything all your life. You're hiding from a beating, you're hiding from this, you're hiding from somebody abusing you, you're hiding from someone taking advantage, you're playing this character, you're playing that character, you're playing the next character. So for me, accents, voices, all that piece of piss. Mm-hmm. I can do that standing on my head. There's no surprise, because I looked into that world as my release. When I was in that place, I used to read Roald Dahl voraciously. He's not his children's stories, adult stories. I find them fascinating. They were dark, you know. And in those days, everything was dark, you know.
Yeah. I've been reading his biography, Roald Dahl, recently, and it's brilliant. And his experience as Repton were pretty horrific.
Yeah. Well, that's that. Yeah.
And you know, a boy, you know, that was edited quite a lot down from the original version of actually what happened there. Yeah.
So it's and do you think that would help me, his book?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember who wrote it. It's probably about 10 years ago. Just a picture of a man with a kite, I think, on the front cover, just his biography.
Right.
It is brilliant. I'll send it to you afterwards.
I mean, there was horror. I was very into horror, which is weird.
Me too.
Nowadays,
I
love James Herbert's The Rats. I remember reading that.
Me too. That's why I was just sat on my metal bed in the dormitory reading Rats and the Spear, Stephen King, Tommy Knockers.
Yes, I used to read the Manitou. Manitou, was it?
I don't remember that one.
That was America. I think it was, but Stephen King. I read some Stephen King. I remember reading that. Yeah, there was a lot of fascination with that kind of dark side. And to this day, this is why I love people like The League of Gentlemen and Inside Number Nine, and because I think they're just brilliantly clever people. I mean, their writing is just top notch. You know, it's extraordinary people. But they're influenced by one of my favorite films of all time, which is Theatre of Blood. Have you ever seen Theatre of Blood?
No, I haven't.
Right. Report back to me. This is one of the.
I'm not really into horrors nowadays.
It's not a horror. It is in a way, but it's a kind of spoof horror. It's Vincent Price.
Oh yeah.
And it's one of his later roles. It's filmed in 1973. It's got a brilliant cast of some of the great character actors of the 70s, Arthur Lowe, Coral Brown, who later married Vincent Price, Dennis Quilley. Is Dennis Quilley? I can't remember. Michael Hordern. I mean, it's just a literal character, you know, the great character actors of the 70s are in it. And it's so clever. It's basically an actor who has just done a tour of the works of Shakespeare, but the critics have panned him, and he decides to kill every one of his critics in a Shakespearean play from the play that panned him in a Shakespearean way. So, like, for example, Lear gets his eyes or whatever it is, and it's just brilliant. Diana Rigg plays his daughter, who is also in on it, and they lure these critics into these incredible. It's amazing. It is my favorite film probably of all time. Yeah, it's brilliant. It's very simple. It's no epic. It's none of that. There's no sword or sandals or any of that. It's just a real brilliant movie just to watch.
Yeah, I'll have to.
And one of the great little things is, as the lorry goes over the bridge at the beginning, it says Shakespeare removals. Just brilliant, you know, and you just get a clue as to what's going to happen, but you're not quite aware yet of exactly where the film's going to go. But it's just so brilliantly put together.
My favorite film growing up, especially at school, was Life of Brian. And interesting,
Really?
yeah, how many of those characters were at boarding school?
Yeah, yeah. I think I preferred Holy Grail for the simple reason that they had such a bad time on it, and also I think it was just more. I don't know what it is about it. Perhaps it's because it's low budget. It's their first one, that it just seems to me to just be a little bit more, if you want me to say, imaginative. I do like Life of Brian, don't get me wrong, but I think they had a storyline more in that. They knew they were following something like Christ, but not Christ. So, but with Holy Grail, it was bizarre and bonkers and crazy and made on a shoestring budget. I think it was made not very much at all. And so they were absolutely miserable. But it was that, I think it's that whole thing of coming through something, battling through, that come through Holy Grail. And
It sounds a bit like Star Wars, that first Star Wars, A New Hope. You know, that was on a shoestring, and you know, they had all the floods in, I think it was Morocco or Tunisia. All the stuff was destroyed. They really didn't think they would make anything of it.
Yeah.
It's
But
almost
let me
like,
tell you, the film that you should have, you seen Bedazzled?
I think so. I think the more recent one.
No, 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 no. Dudley Moore saw that. He wanted to leave the cinema. He said, I cannot bear this. And he wasn't well at the time.
Right.
No, the original 1967 Bedazzled, which was written by Peter Cook. It's just absolutely brilliant. I think it's on YouTube. It's got Raquel Welch in it. It's got, I mean, just a list of great comedians and people, you know, Eleanor Bron and Barry Humphries, and, you know, just so many people. Not with us, but just absolutely brilliant. But I want to come to Peter, and I want to bring something up, which I'm only going to suggest because I don't want legal on this. It's a suggestion. That's all it is. But it's a theory, if you like. I think I got out just at the right time. I gave up alcohol. I'm over 10 years dry, right? So I had 10 and a half years, actually. I gave it up on 2014 on the 24th of January. Peter didn't. Peter died at the age of 57. He was drinking the worst alcohol you could imagine. He was coming out of his local off license, carrying like White Lightning or that awful beer. You know, when he was doing Chris Morris's Why Bother, he sat there and he's just got this massive bag full of alcohol and cans of low calorie. Yeah, he's still just brilliant. He's still pushing himself out there. He's still brilliant. But people said about Peter towards the end of his life that they didn't want to bother him because he seemed to have disappeared. And I thought to myself, this is so like me. This is where I went. I didn't want people to know I existed. You know, I was an alcoholic. I didn't want, you know, and I've hidden away for a while now. I've had to sort of heal and, you know, in sobriety. And I wonder, and there's a talk when he's on Parkinson where he says, what do you remember the most? Parkinson says, Peter, what do you remember the most about boarding school? He says, well, I was trying to avoid buggery. And you think in those days, there was a huge laughter from the audience. They're all laughing. And that's the 70s for, of course. And then he says, was there any time you felt safe? He said, well, bugger time. And then you think, hang on a second, what's going on here? But what he said is interesting because he didn't say avoiding buggery. He said trying to avoid buggery.
Mm-hmm.
And one thinks, when one hears that, there's something darker here.
Mm-hmm.
And those days, they wouldn't have known. Those days, it would have been covered up. Those days, you know, you wouldn't have said anything because you wouldn't have understood it. It hasn't been a recently thing, you know. Mm-hmm. So I wonder, it's just a question. It's only a question of theory. Did something happen to Peter?
Well, it's interesting because he's in Nick Duffell's book, Trauma, Abandonment, and Privilege, he does talk about Peter Cook and how, you know, he didn't come from a rich family, but he went to Radley and he was taken the piss out of because he didn't have new clothes. And the biographer of Peter Cook, he says that was how he survived, was his humor. That, you know, and so many of British humor in the 60s, 70s, 80s came out of boarding school. And Eric Idle, he's asked, well, why did you become a comedian? He says, because I had to survive boarding school or something
Yeah,
along those
yeah,
lines. And
yeah.
hear that over and over again. So, you know, I think the statistics I've seen are up to 50% of boarding schools either have had allegations against them or of sexual abuse, um, you know, in that period of
Unbelievable.
time.
Yeah, unbelievable.
And it's like, what? You know, Alex Renton, he has on his database 13 to 1400 people for something like 3 to 400 schools, you know, 80% of which are boarding schools. So you're looking at that's half of boarding school. So that you're saying this, it doesn't surprise me, you know, but, you know, as someone in our documentary says, he says, you know, 80% of child abuse is not talked about because it's still amazing in the UK, this mandatory reporting. It's still on the child to speak up. But, you know, Alex Renton says 1 in 9 will come forward, but the 8 out of 9 will not speak up for child
Is
abuse.
that
And
true? Is that true?
yeah, that's the figures Alex quotes in his book, that it's only a very small percentage of people. And I know quite a lot of people from my school who were sexually abused, but they're in positions of power and they daren't speak up because they will feel they lose their job. They will lose their position. So they will speak.
My golly gosh.
And so
Wow.
it's you know, it's this loop. And so yeah, so it doesn't surprise me. I think, you know, and a bit like we're having the cover up and the blood scandals are coming to fore, you know, we've got the ICSA, but I feel the next 20, 30 years, so much of this will just boom, come and we'll be like, oh my God. And I'm reading at the moment the A Legacy of Violence by Caroline Elkins, who's a Harvard professor. And I don't think I've.
Well, this is what is interesting because the new Earth, or what you want to talk about, is the future. Is where the bad is coming into a period where it can't go on almost where we are enlightening to a higher level. And people talk about the 3D and the 5D, which I do believe in, you know, but the 5D isn't like a new Earth in the sense where there's not a new Earth. It's like we're rising to a higher level of consciousness.
Definitely. I really believe it.
Do you know what I mean?
Of course,
So,
I really believe
I
that.
mean, I won't read a newspaper these days. I won't, because I'll get triggered by stuff and I don't want to know. But as a Buddhist, I will chant for the world to be a better place. I would chant. There's nothing wrong with that. But I don't have to sit next to someone reading the Metro. You know, I can't bear it. I can't bear this people who sit there and reading this shit and going like taking it all in. It's just such crap. Makes
Yeah.
me quite angry, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I remember it must have been 20 years ago, and I was talking to someone. I stopped reading the newspaper, I think, 25 years ago, and I met someone 20 years ago, and he said he stopped reading the newspapers one day when he got a pair of scissors and he cut out every negative story, and all he was left with was the adverts and the sport.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant. Yeah, because obviously it thrives on negativity.
Yeah. It's
This
not
world
trauma informed.
thrives. It's like a little. This is the pain body again. This world is full of pain bodies, all thriving on negativity and having fun in this devilish negative way. It's awful.
Yeah, yeah. So, finding this conversation fascinating. Thank you so much, John.
I'm loving it. I'm just getting
What
so much out. I don't care. Don't give a shit.
what else have you found on the path of healing? So you mentioned Buddhism. You also mentioned before we began about writing. Do you want to share a bit about that?
Well, I originally wrote a play which should have had another life. I co-wrote it. I sometimes get, there's the ego coming. I wrote it. No, I didn't. I co-wrote it, and I wrote it with a wonderful one, a very gifted writer, comedian, impressionist called Clive Greenwood, who has a huge post-war knowledge of British comedy, and I read all of it. It's basically set in the afterlife about Peter and Dudley, and they have to get on with each other in order to move on. But unfortunately, they're up against a heavenly panel for Derek and Clive, their foul-mouthed alter egos, which are extremely blasphemous. So it's a crazy. It's called Goodbye, because of their last song, but it's called Goodbye, the Afterlife of Cook and More. And it did well at Edinburgh. It was loved. It had a run at 6 weeks at the Comedy Museum. I'd love someone to take it on. If you've got any producer people who might be interested, always fascinating. Anybody in the industry, always good. But that was my first incarnation of writing, and I enjoyed it, but I was with somebody else. Now I'm writing on my own. I didn't think I'd be able to do this, but I'm doing this course at the moment, which has I've got an extraordinary breakthrough this year. I think I've had a bit of a breakthrough, not a breakdown, but a breakthrough. So, what happened was at the beginning of the year, about April, a friend of mine said, there's this lady who teaches a writing course. And I thought, okay, that sounds interesting. And I thought, because he was doing it, I'd do it as well. And it's a little bit of cost, but I did it. And I knew I wanted to write about my life because it's a really fascinating life. I ain't famous. I'm nobody well known really, but I've done my bits. You know, you'd know me off EastEnders and shit like that, but little moments, you know, characters and shit. But I'm not, you know, I'm nobody well known, but it's a very interesting story. And I thought, okay, I'll go along and do this. But one of the great things about this course is not only do you get a nutritionist, someone who looks after you while you're writing, because when you're writing this kind of stuff, you can go quite dark. So you can get depression, you can get all that stuff. So if your nutrition is kept up, then you're in a good state. On the other side, I have not only a life coach, but a psychic, and also someone who's expert on screenplays and writing. So
Wow.
I've got one, and that's helping me through this course. I mean, what wonderful gifts can you ask for? So that is where that came from. But in fact, I'd started the screenplay over a year ago, or the idea for the screenplay, and I sat down in Pret and just poured my life story out to this poor, young, vulnerable woman who happens to be a young producer, but also went to a terrible boarding school, but in Latvia. And the other one, yeah, she's Latvian, but she went through a really tough childhood. And the other guy who's doing it now is a Chinese guy. Well, he's not Chinese, he's English Chinese, but he's a really talented guy called Greg, who also went through a shit boarding school. So that you see, isn't it weird how they all collaborate and we all understand each other and we're very good friends. So it's a very nice sort of feeling when we all get together and we start to write things, you know?
So you found this process of writing to be very cathartic.
I think it really is when you get to it, because I can use my humor in it, which I love. I've got moments of the Twilight Zone in it, which is one of my favorite series, you know?
Yeah.
Um, and I've got me doing some stand up at the beginning. I've got this character in it who's a therapist, who's actually me therapizing me. So that's mental. Loads of crazy shit going on. It's almost like a sort of I suppose it's a bit like League of Gentlemen. It's a little bit like Inside Number 9, but it's quite moving. Because unfortunately, what happened to me, and I don't mind who knows it, I was hung. They tried to hang me in 2 schools, both of them. First school, they tried to hang me, put a noose around my neck in a paddock. And the second school was even worse because when I was in that school, they threw a noose around the theatre. It was in the theatre. I became a performer. Oh, you got to laugh, haven't you? But they threw a noose around her neck. 2 of these guys, I was sweeping the stage. They obviously didn't like me, fair enough. And they were, and they literally tied me to a chair and tried to make me piss myself and put the biggest light. I remember putting a big light on. They had the big stage lights and they put this light on me. And then they tried to make me piss myself. And I remember them pushing the chair. I think it fell off. And I remember my ankle feeling like it hurt. But they weren't happy with that. So then they decided to get a ladder, get a rope, stick it over the theatre thing, and put back on my head. And the son of the priest gave me my last rites, and I had to walk up. I thought I was going to die because in those days these people were nuts. This was almost like a prison. It wasn't. It almost wasn't. You couldn't really call it. It was. It was more of a sporting school in some ways. I think might have had something to do with it. But yeah, that was rough. And they ran out. You say you never say anything to anybody, and I remember the little bastards used to. The other thing they used to do is they get brambles, and because there were 3 of them, and that one of them was very fast. They used to whip me with brambles on my legs on cross country runs. So stuff like that went on, But yeah, so yeah,
Sorry to hear your experiences.
yeah, that goes into it, and then stuff with my dad as well. That some of that was tough. Some of that was really tough. I remember once I was on a diving board and I wasn't allowed to come in and eat anything until I dived, but I belly flopped instead. And yeah, and I was in that pain when I sat down to eat because I knew I couldn't get down from the diving board.
Wow.
Weird childhood, man. Weird.
Wow. Wow. It's really lovely that you are transforming that into the gold, into
Having
something
to, no choice,
to give
no choice.
to other people.
That's it. And that's the thing. I hope the show will highlight CPTSD and why it needs to be looked at more seriously. And that's what the film's about. It's about looking at what this is. Why does this send you into these weird frenzies, this strange, for example, I thought I had dyspraxia. Because one of the things you do at drama school, of course, is you dance, you do choreographed movements, which I couldn't do. And I thought I must be odd or different to people. No, obviously it was trauma. And obviously it was a voice in my head saying, what the fuck do you think you're doing? You can't turn left, you can't turn right, you're fucking incapable. Who the fuck do you think you are? These grandiose ideas of being da-di-da-di-da. It's a voice in your head, but in CPTSD, it's a fierce voice in your head. It's not a normal voice. It's savage. And you're trying to do all these twists and turns with something in your head going, no, you're not going to be able to do that. It's fucking you. Who the fuck do you think you are? Getting these grand ideas, all
Yeah.
the bullying you've had in your life is in your head.
Yeah, I
So
can
once
resonate.
you realize that, you realize it's just a voice, then you're on the way to recovery. It's the awareness that is the thing. Once you're aware of that voice in your head and you can notice it, it gets weaker slowly.
I think Pete Walker says it's like we've got to do that, you know, every day. We just got to keep battling, keep battling, keep
Yeah,
battling. And
always forward, always forward. The only way out is through.
yeah, yeah. I think I heard something by Denzel Washington saying fall forward rather than fall back.
Absolutely. Well, as sad as it may sound, this is why I think so many soldiers were shot in the First World War, because they could not afford to have defeatist attitude, and they could not afford to have a fallback. They can't afford people walking off or any of that. They had to be strict about it, because the only way out, as sad and all that was, the only way is through.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So we've been talking nearly an hour now. I did say it would go quickly. It's been
I
a
love
real.
it. I love it.
Is there
Sure.
anything else that maybe as we're speaking, You know, you mentioned boredom there. It's interesting. I've got my diary here from when I was at boarding school,
Oh
and
my God, you are organised. I don't have anything. I don't even have
no.
any friends. I'm one, not one. I have one guy who used to quite like me. I think was a bit quirky, but I don't have one friend that I can actually remember in any way. No, not one.
Yeah, yeah, I have.
But also, the interesting thing is, Piers, when I left, I was 5'7". In 1 year, I was 6'1".
Wow, that's fascinating.
That's repression, isn't it?
I've heard a few. I think I was already very tall when I got there, so I think that meant I wasn't bullied. I was one of the tallest on my year. I'm only 5'8" now, but I didn't grow.
Yeah.
So a lot of my friends kind of grew a lot kind of taller. But interesting is as I read this, there's two things about this diary which I'd forgotten about. One was boredom. I was bored nearly all the time. Second thing was beating. Nearly every page is me being hit. Oh, I've been beaten again. But it's just like
Yeah, 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 yeah.
totally
That's
forgot.
right. I can't remember what happened. I must have had some. I had some very horrible things happen in both schools. Very nasty, like hangings and stuff. That wasn't fun. But fucking hell. You just get through it, man. You just get through it. Keep going.
So as we start to wrap up, is there any last message you'd like to share with the
Well,
audience?
Buddhists say Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, which means basically believe in the power of the universe or believe in the mystic law. And I love it because I mean, I, I embrace, I want to talk a little bit about religion actually, because I think we've been dumbed down so much with religion. Christianity is a pedestalized religion in the sense that we believe in someone who's going to solve all our problems. Well, fine, all right. That's the lazy man's way out, I'm afraid. For me, it's always something within. I have to become stronger within in order to solve my problems. I think Jesus was an incredible man, but I don't think that what is written is true. And I don't think there's actually a theory about Jesus that he was a Buddhist monk and he went to India because the Bible leaves out 20 years. What happened in 20 years? Why suddenly do we go at the age of 12 when he's quite happily making a chair to the next minute he's on another piece of wood 20 years later. Sorry, excuse my caustic wit, but he's actually in the temple, telling the people selling things in the temple. He gets annoyed with them, and then later on he's on. But what happens is 20 years, and the theory is in those days they had lots of trade routes, and Jesus went to India where he was called Isa or something like that, and he studied the Vedas. And if you look at some of the ways that the Gospels are written and things like that, they're very Buddhist in the way he speaks. It's very Buddhist in its ideology, So I love Jesus. I love all the stories about the disciples. I'm sure he had 12 disciples. I'm not sure um, if he fed the 5,000 or that sort of thing, or all this sort of thing. I think a lot of we've been dumbed down and sat in our place. And you know what school's like as well. We're all put down and told to sing these songs and do what we do because everyone wants a happy life and no one to stir anything up. And look where we are now, for God's sake. I mean, if anything is stirred up, it's everywhere, man. It's everywhere. That's why I think the new earth is coming. That's why it's all changing, I think.
Mm, yeah, yeah. Very positive message. Well, thank you very much, John, for your time today. It's been a
I'd
real
love to.
pleasure.
It's been an
Uh,
absolute joy. Isn't it funny how we're so similar?
yeah,
Not
I didn't realize that. I'd obviously spoken to Joanna and I'd heard some bits and pieces, but I hadn't realized that you know that your mother had been an artist and
Yeah.
you know so fascinating. But yeah, bless you. So how do people find out more or kind of reach out to you if you
Well,
want to?
you can just look up Jonathan Hansler, JonathanHansler,
Hmm.
and I'm bloody everywhere. You won't be able to avoid me. My IMDb page, you'll come up. Will come up. I've done 100. I've got 111 IMDb credits, which is the Internet Movie Database. So I've kept going. God, through so much. I think I've done about 150 plays. I wrote. As I say, God, I shudder to think I've just done a movie which is at Fright Fest at the moment. It's just about to open. Fright Fest, and I play a Southern hick in it who runs a trailer park full of vampires, and I've got another, and that's actually sold out. So they're doing, in the history of Fright Fest, they've never done this before. They're doing another screening at the Odeon Leicester Square, and that's at the 25th and 26th of. But yes, I'm bloody everywhere. I'm annoying. I try not to be. I try to sort of, in fact, when I do post on Facebook, it's not, unless I'm publicizing something, it's generally, hopefully, messages of hope for people rather than just, generalized acting crap. I won't call it crap. It's a job and I love it. I do love it. And nowadays I love it more than I ever did, because I know that I'm coming through something and I'm using everything I can within me to make my work stronger.
Beautiful. Well, thank you for your
And
work.
with a message, I like to do work with a message, really.
Yeah, what a beautiful, beautiful thing. Well, bless you. Thank you so much, John, and I look forward to
Yeah.
speaking soon. Bye-bye.
Should I, by the way, Piers, should I give you a link or something like that
Yeah, just give me a
to
link and I'll put it into the description.
I'll
And
give you
then,
my spotlight link or something like that, and you can get to me that way, or just go on Facebook. I'll give you my FB and my Instagram and all that.
yeah, definitely do
How
that.
do I do that? Just put it on the. I'm terrible. I mean,
No,
one of
no,
the
no,
things. I
just
don't know. You're a
email me.
technophobe as well. Are you very good with all this stuff? I'm absolutely hopeless with all this stuff.
Yeah, I will once we press stop then we'll connect and
Cool.
people can go into Instagram or Facebook to connect with
Cool.
me.
Wicked. Wicked. Wicked.
Cool. Right.
Excellent.
Thank you, John. Take care.
Thanks, man. Bye-bye. Bye.